This session here is technology's role in climate resilience and the transition to net zero. Important topic, certainly not one that I can tackle on my own. So I'm going to ask my panelists to please come up and join me on stage, if you will. And if I can ask you to sort of sit underneath your names, will be easy for the audience if I can. KK Chong, welcome, please come down. Head of Sustainable Development at Delta Electronics. Tanya Sullivan, welcome to the discussion. Tanya is the Head of Sustainability for GoTo. Hirataka Ishizaka is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Singapore for the Mitsubishi Corporation. And last but not least, Charlie Ill, who is the Chief Executive of Investable. Welcome, panelists, to this session. It should be a fun and interesting one. I've got some questions for you. And I'm hoping the audience is going to have lots of questions for us as well. So we'll leave plenty of time for those. Do have a think about your questions as we go. We've been touching on technology for the last sort of day and a half a little bit, if you've been here sort of listening. But this is now the first real opportunity to dig into technology's role in sustainability and driving decarbonisation and reaching our net zero targets. And so it's exciting to sort of deep dive into that, into the role of technology, because it's clearly got a big role, and sometimes it's sort of underappreciated how quickly we might be able to develop through it. I know VJ was talking about, I think early on yesterday morning, solar panels, which is a really good example of technology to try and help decarbonisation, drive the energy transition, and how it's blown away all expectations of how quickly that was able to develop, how quickly the price is being able to drive down, how quickly we've been able to ramp up volumes. Large extent, thank you to China for sort of helping that happen. But most people, I think everybody, underestimated how quickly we would be able to get to the sort of the scale and the cost that we have got to with solar panels. So we want to sort of dig into sort of some of those factors that enabled that to happen, and to look at the role of sort of technology a little bit more generally as well. So, and again, I'll come to you for questions as well as we go. Charlie, I might start with you, if I may, because like lots of things, it starts with the money. And the money needed to sort of help drive this and support this acceleration of technology, and being able to have that support to sort of do everything that we need to do with it. Tell us about that. How are we at with providing the right capital situation for technology and helping to drive the net zero transition? Are we in a good place? Do we need more of it? Is the ecosystem standing up for us? Is it agile enough?
Good question. I think certainly when it comes to the start of technology, in many cases it even starts with the idea.
Oh.
Right? It's the entrepreneurs that actually put it together and then go chase the money. My view of the world is there is always more capital that can be deployed into technology, in particular for climate tech startups. Specifically because of the relative complexity of those solutions and the capital requirements that those solutions necessarily need. And more than anything else, it then creates a competitive environment for the best deals. And so as more capital does fall into place and is shared among a lot more people who deploy that capital, you do find there's a greater competition for great deals and a lot more activity that then can recycle and hopefully elevate these businesses into a more mature state.
You did rightly point out it is the startups and it is the idea. And Tanya, I might ask you about that one. Are we in a good place to be able to share the knowledge and the ideas from startups? Do we have the right sort of platforms in place at the moment so that we can sort of know what's out there from an ideas perspective and get those to market? How are we sort of doing from that perspective?
So for us, I mean, we're a platform company, and so we're all about the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And within our ecosystem, we've got millions of users and drivers and merchants. And so for us, as we're approaching some of the sustainability commitments and targets that we've set, we know we have to kind of source these startups and these innovative solutions and technologies and find the ones that can best meet the needs of our stakeholders first and foremost. Because if it doesn't work for a driver, if it doesn't work for a merchant, if it doesn't work for a consumer from a price, from an accessibility, from a scalability perspective, then it's not going to work in our ecosystem. And so, having the kind of sandbox to be able to test out and pilot a lot of these solutions is crucial for us. And that's how we've kind of approached it. So any solution that works within our ecosystem is a great testbed for the Indonesian market overall. And I dare say for a lot of other emerging markets as well.
I've seen this in other sectors, say in the healthcare sector, some of the work we've done where a lot of the startups, because of sort of market forces, commercial imperative, they focus on areas where, let's be honest, they can make the most money and may not necessarily
Yes.
be the biggest market societal need to focus on there. Is this a bit different? Or is it like you're seeing this as well?
If any of you, if you're familiar with the Indonesian market overall, there is a knowledge gap in terms of the types of solutions that are coming out from in market, and the needs that we have and this urgency that we have to be able to meet a lot of the sustainability challenges in the country. And so we're doing a combination of both sourcing local solutions, but also importing a lot of kind of outside help in terms of technical capabilities, in terms of technical knowledge. The challenge with that is exactly as you mentioned. If I'm pitching to a startup in Australia or in the UK or wherever who has a very advanced material that we could actually use, for example, for our for our merchants, right, on our food delivery business, they've got to think about it like, well, if I sell my product in the US, I'm going to get X% premium versus what I'd potentially be selling in a country like Indonesia, where obviously the purchasing power is not as great as what it might be in a more advanced market. So that's the conversation we're having, where I'm really kind of trying to bring them in from a, look at the scale you could reach in a country, in a market like Indonesia. You solve this problem here, you can solve this problem in a lot of the emerging world, right? Versus in the US or in more advanced markets where the sustainability challenges, the climate-related risks aren't as acute or as pressing.
Yeah, it can clearly make a bigger impact there.
Exactly.
Maybe a little bit harder to access and grow in that market. Charlie, do you have a similar view? Are you seeing this?
Yeah, I am. I think certainly because we're a venture capital fund with offices both in Sydney as well as in Singapore, we do see quite a bit of crossover and opportunities where the entrepreneurs and the startups are delivering solutions overseas and finding a better customer segment.
Yeah.
Most of the Australian founders start global first because Australia as a market is oftentimes too small for these businesses to simply grow into a billion-dollar business at home. And so they're constantly thinking about what's the next place to expand the business. The U.S. is clearly a clear candidate for that. Parts of Europe as well. But where we've started to see a resurgence, in particular in our industry, has been to Southeast Asia. And I believe that has a lot to do with the underserved customer segment that is there, plus the relative complexity of the solutions that Singapore and Australia can provide to those markets. And it's now more so than ever, we're starting to see that interest on behalf of the investors and the entrepreneurs to expand their businesses overseas into Southeast Asia more broadly.
I think it's really positive. I mean, like you, I'm based in Australia as well. I know a lot about the Australian tech firms, and you do see them sort of, first port of call is sort of, growing and expanding in the US, the UK to some extent. Yeah. Not so present in Southeast Asia, which is a bit weird given the size of the market, population-wise, and the proximity to the market.
Yeah, I think a lot of the VCs that we, our peers, most of them will sell to an entrepreneur their ability to give that entrepreneur access to the more developed and larger markets such as the US. I think the reason why I'm here and one of the reasons why you guys have asked me on is in particular, we're not that. We're one of the funds that actually features Southeast Asia as a pathway to generate better growth for the startups. And for that reason, it's been my experience that we've seen a lot more startups make it to Southeast Asia than over to the US or Europe.
Yeah.
At least in our portfolio.
Excellent. Really interesting. Love talking about startups. Might come back to it a little bit later in the session. Hopefully we've got some startups in the room. Might have some questions for us as well. But let's move a little bit on to sort of more traditional industries. And here I'd love to sort of get your perspective on this. Mitsubishi is a dynamic, agile company, but very traditional. You've been around for a very long period of time. How does all this look for you? What role does sort of technology play in the net zero transition for you at Mitsubishi? How are you thinking about these sort of innovation pieces?
Okay, maybe I'll break that into two parts. So one is probably more about our company. It's the trading and investment company within the Mitsubishi Group. So we work in most industries throughout the value chain and globally as well. We have about 200 offices worldwide. So we have a very good hands-on view of what's happening in the industry, especially the pain points. So what is it, the pain, and once you understand the pain, the bigger the pain, the bigger the need for the solution. That's where technology comes in. So I think during, these 2 days, a lot of people have been talking about efficiency, and that's where technology can really, I think, do many things. So bringing it down to more a granular level. For example, I'm based in Singapore, and one of the themes that have been working on is the decarbonization of the maritime industry. So we have actually retrofitted large ships with fixed sails, so we would use wind, and then we would also use what is now called AI, to try to navigate the best course, from point A to point B. What that does is that reduces the amount of bunker fuel that you use. So it's a very quantitative way to reduce, the cost of shipping, taking one vessel to another point, but it's also sustainable because you use less bunker fuel, so there's less emissions going out into the atmosphere. So it's a win-win in that kind of case.
When you're focusing on these efficiency sort of elements to your business, is that the technology adoption, is the use of it is all sort of homegrown from your perspective, or are you tapping into the startup community to get new ideas and new technologies, new ways of working? What does that innovation look like for you?
Definitely, I've been traveling to what's called the Silicon Valley in the West Coast since the early 90s, we've had a presence in terms of, in those days, about the semiconductor, so in those days it wasn't really that sexy, and the startups and venture capital were things that people did on a day-to-day kind of basis. I think, the industry sort of grew up, later on, but as a company, we are open to various technologies, and the good thing is that a lot of VCs and startups come to us because, as I said, we have the industry expertise. So we can tell, or at least my business colleagues throughout the industry can let me know that this will work, but this won't because of these reasons. So it might look good on paper, but if you talk to people who really know, the ground, then they will be able to sort of validate whether or not this solution will actually work. So that's something quite helpful for us.
Excellent. I'm glad you know what works. I might come back with you and get a few more examples of what has worked. But KK, to you next, still staying on sort of legacy industries as well. I know you work with, we've got sort of a few different perspectives here. You work in other sectors, manufacturing, for example. Tell us about sort of what you're doing with technology to sort of in that sort of legacy industry to drive some of these efficiency improvements, this sort of path to net zero.
Okay, just a quick introduction about what Delta is doing. So, traditionally, we were founded as a component maker. So, we are quite strong in electronic manufacturing. So, mostly in power management solutions and products. Things like transistor, the very small little component that you find in your mobile phones, networking systems, and all this. But these are product-based for ODM customers. So about 15 years ago, we started to go into our own solutions, Delta branded solutions. So we use the core competence of Delta, which is in power management technology. That is, we are actually the #1 producer and in terms of technology and market share for switching power supply in the world. So based on that core technology, we developed industrial solutions like renewable energy, data center infrastructures, telecom power, and things like that, and EV charging solutions. So with that, apparently we have a lot of cases, success cases, in helping customers to transition to net zero. Of course, not many companies now actually achieving net zero, but we are on the way. So with that experience, we can safely say that we do not need to sacrifice legacy installation solutions or infrastructure on our way to transition to net zero. In fact, Delta's headquarters in Thailand, in Bangpoo, Samut Prakan, we are LEED certified green building in the category of existing building. meaning to say we actually retrofitted our existing building with new solutions. And we do that progressively. So since 2014 until 2024, we have actually managed to save over 42 million kilowatt hours of energy. And if I remember correctly, in terms of a solar rooftop, yeah, we actually covered more than 90% of our existing buildings. So these are the things that we can do progressively. Yeah, and there are a lot of modular solutions in the market. In fact, our data center solutions include things like containerized data center. And containerized data center itself doesn't require you to build a big infrastructure. It's like a standard container. And we just recently had a success case in Philippines with the national power utility company called Transco. So we helped them to install a containerized data center in not easily accessible area. So these are the things that we can do towards net zero transition.
Yeah, that containerized data centers, that sounds interesting. Maybe for the audience here, maybe just talk us through what sort of applications would you use for that? What are the benefits for that? Is it for sort of short-term usage, or is it for remote locations where it might be hard to access sort of a larger permanent data center, or is it something else? Or?
It can be, it can be powered from the grid itself or through renewable energy.
I mean, ultimately, I guess you want to get renewable
Right,
as well.
right.
You want to containerize it to somewhere, maybe where
Right.
the power access is a bit harder to get,
Yes.
but you bring it as a sort of self-contained unit.
Exactly. So if it's a self-sufficient solution that comes together with say solar power, right? If we put that whole thing solution up, we call it a microgrid solutions. So Delta also do that, right? So back to your question, what's the benefits? The key benefits would be, first is modular. You could increase them as your business grows, as the scale of your company grows. You can just have more containers. Yeah, that's one thing. And you can stack them up. In Australia, we have a big customers, and yeah, they are probably one of the region's leader in terms of this data center infrastructure. So we are probably their number one supplier in that sense. So I've seen them building, stacking up containerized solutions and then implementing them in Singapore, if I'm not wrong, recently. And then the regions also, they are expanding. So these are very modular, very flexible. It can be, be anywhere. You can use the power, the energy from the power grid, or you can simply set up a microgrid like what I just mentioned. You can have an energy storage system, which coincidentally, Delta also have that, the ESS, and then you connect it to the solar panel. And yeah, in fact, we have a net zero container showroom that is in Thailand, Chonburi, in the EEC zone. And if you are interested, you can actually go to our website, deltathailand.com. You can have a virtual tour. That is a typical example of how a net zero, in that case, is a showroom, but apparently the data center, the concept is the same. If inside it's not a showroom, it is a data center, it can be powered by independent microgrid solution over there also. So that is the key benefits of a containerized data center.
Interesting. We might see containers sort of peppering our countryside for a while, sort of all of these applications. It sounds small and agile, and sounds certainly a good and interesting thing to do. Thinking about sort of future technologies, Charlie, I might start with you and then sort of get each of your views on this one, because I'm sure a lot of new innovations, technologies come across your desk. Maybe the next solar panel idea or something like that. Just wondering, how do you define what is good from a technology perspective to try and address net zero, climate mitigation, adaptation? How do you sort of define what it is? What might be the most exciting things you see coming out there?
So when we look at technologies, a minimum criteria is that the company needs to be able to generate revenue and reduce emissions, right? That's the fundamentals. That then qualifies it through the climate tech track, and then we start to do a much deeper analysis on the company itself. So a
but
great
not be profitable. Sorry, generate revenues.
Oh,
be profitable.
absolutely.
Okay.
Must be profitable. Yes.
Yeah. Over a time frame, or do you give them some leeway?
It varies. It depends on the type of technology and
Okay.
its business model and strategies. But more often than not, and specifically in the climate tech space, we prefer to see that the business itself, from a gross margin, is generating margin. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, I break your chain.
No, that's okay. When we look at startups, we do a number of things, and a lot of things that I believe most of our peers would underestimate the complexity or the level of work that we do. So, for example, we would put the founders through psychometric testing. We would see if there are any particular gaps inside the founding team, because at the end of the day, when it's two entrepreneurs out of a garage, it is absolutely, ultimately, the founders that are going to take that thing and grow it.
Yeah. So in a technology world, there is still very much a people aspect.
100%. Now, on the technology side of things, in particular, Australia is one of the leading when it comes to patent generation per capita, but it's one of the largest trailers when it comes to economic complexity. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that's being stored within the universities at the moment that needs to be untapped. And that's for a variety of different reasons. And so one of the things that we look into is which universities are working with this particular company, where is the technology actually coming from, and what are the types of patent arrangements or licensing arrangements that this company has been able to secure for itself. Once we've done that, after having done a thorough review of the technology with experts in the field, customer references, et cetera, we then put the founder through a ringer, which is really to tear apart the business in its multiple facets, whether it's the business model, whether it's its ability to bolt on to an existing process quite easily.
Yeah.
That's a very important part of this type of business, because a lot of my corporate peers here at the stage, I imagine, can agree. You don't want to restart an operation or a process for a new technology.
Yeah.
You want technologies that easily bolt on to existing systems and processes.
So the retrofit sort of approach to things.
Retrofit sort of, or things that are just more easily done and
Okay.
executable. And that really is a good testament to the company's ability to scale quickly. And then ultimately, it's the company's ability to then raise capital and continue to raise capital into the long term. So we look at tailwinds, regulatory support for it, but also what are some of the other investors thinking about, or corporate VCs thinking about, when it comes to this particular type of solution? Is this going to be something that's attractive in the late stages of funding as well?
Anything on your desk that excites you?
Yeah, we got a few.
You can share.
Yeah, sure, we got a few. One in particular, and I think this is what you'll find with the Australian market. When we have core industries such as the mining industry, there is this, several decades of expertise that has actually been able to build a lot of solutions around the fringes. And so one of the things that Australia is quite good at, in particular, is circular economy solutions, specifically when it handles battery materials or materials that come out of the ground. And so there's a particular company in our portfolio that is able to extract battery materials. The incumbents are at a 60% extraction rate or efficiency. The emerging technologies are at an 80%, and our company's at a 95%, because they're able to skip a particular step in the battery processing to extract that material. And so what that does is it means that all your big OEMs that you would expect to be interested in that type of technology have all come knocking and are very interested in what they can do with it.
That's super interesting. Maybe we should have got them on Vijay's panel earlier today, where he was focused on batteries.
Yes, that's right. I saw that one. Absolutely.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Tanya, from your perspective, how do you sort of evaluate the sort of technologies, areas of innovation that should be focused on, and again, what anything is exciting you across your desk at the moment?
A lot of stuff excites me, but I think first to kind of iterate that the solutions that we eventually introduce into our ecosystem and our platform, there's a very wide spectrum of what kinds of products and solutions we're utilizing in the end. And it's everything from what you would consider high tech, like very advanced materials, like new technologies and what have you, to sometimes very brick and mortar solutions, because in a lot of these challenges that we are facing for our merchants, for our drivers, for our consumers, we actually need to have brick and mortar solutions in order for them to work. And so some of these very advanced technologies actually would not be scalable or affordable or accessible in our context. And so we look at a very wide range of these types of solutions. Some of the things I'm excited about is some of the startups that are coming our way with very creative solutions to, for example, things like packaging, right? Using repurposed materials to be able to, not just for the e-commerce business, but also from the food delivery business and everything in between, using very locally sourced materials and actually going back to kind of reverting to a lot of the traditional ways that we used to do things in Indonesia. I mean, I remember as a child going with my grandmother to the market, and you wouldn't see plastic anywhere. There was no single-use plastic. Everything was used. Every part of the animal, every part of the plant, every part of the what have you. And Indonesians were very creative in how they reused, reutilized, repurposed, re-added value to a lot of these products. So it's kind of like what we're seeing is going back to those days. It's just making sure that there's no green premium for it so that it is actually something that is accessible for our users in our ecosystem so that it can scale.
Is it possible to stay that line, no green premium, going forward? I mean, there was an interesting case study on earlier today from Nestle. I think we were talking about Milo, and they were swapping out the plastic straws. It's not a technology thing. It's swapping out the plastic straws for paper straws, and it cost them more. I think it was 30% more or something like that for those straws. So there is a premium there for that. Is it possible to keep doing everything you need to do to get to net zero without paying a green premium?
Well, to make my job interesting, at the very least, I will share a little bit of this tidbit, within this room, is that my boss makes my job interesting by, one of my main constraints I have is that I'm not allowed to have a budget. So whatever I or my team does has to either replace or reduce OpEx for the company. And for the last 5 years, we've been able to do that. And so, when people talk about these big sustainability budgets and ask the fact that this is people how much is your CEO giving you and all of that, in our context we never actually had. I mean, the only line item we have is our auditor for our ESG report every year. And outside of that, it's a very good exercise in trying to actually find leakages and ways that you can be more efficient from an operational perspective. And that's actually how we've been able to hit a lot of the targets and achievements that we have so far.
Okay, that's it. I mean, that's a really clear sort of directive. I like that directive.
It's also because we don't have very big coffers, but let's put that out there.
You can do whatever you want.
We're not Mitsubishi or some of these bigger companies.
Hero, from your perspective, I feel like you're, as a traditional industry, you might take a slightly different approach to some of these ones that we've just been hearing about.
As a trading company, we always need to be a step or half step ahead of our, let's say the industry, because we need to support our partners, So we've always, as a company, we've transitioned and changed shape various ways. So we're always trying to see what the future holds. So technology has a very big part in that. But from a business point of view, I always start to look at where the demand is, not where the solution is. I think the demand or the pain point, actually what determines how big the solution or the business can be, and whether it's effective. So that's basically where I start from. So as I mentioned, because we work in so many industries, we can sort of see where there's this big, need or demand. So that's where we first start. And then in terms of technology, I often think that, it's maybe a combination of old and new technology. For example, you have the QR code. And that really helped fintech move ahead. But you also needed the smartphone to actually make it happen, in terms of fintech. So that's a combination of old and new. Another example might be that we have a carbon credit project in India where we're trying to reduce the amount of methane from rice cultivation together with Bayer, Shell, and Gen Zero. I think it's public, but maybe not. But we're actually using, old technology. We're dry planting seeds. That technology has been available, but you didn't have the MRV, to actually validate how much emissions you're actually reducing, So that's also a combination of using, and by doing so, the farmers get better productivity, less water usage, and as a bonus, they also get extra revenue from carbon credits. So as a business sense, it also makes sense. So I think, of course, cutting edge technology is really interesting, and I've always been interested in deep tech. So I think moving forward, technology like fusion, nuclear fusion, we thought that would be decades ahead. But I think there's the U.S., I wouldn't call it a startup, it's so well funded, but they'll be doing a POC, I think, next year in terms of building an actual reactor, So these things are coming ahead, but then that's because there's that need for renewable energy, So
Yeah.
that's where the funding, I think, also comes from. So I think, of course, you need to keep a look on the cutting edge technology, which can really disrupt or transform industries. But I think from a practical point of view, you can also probably need to look at, how you can use current technology, which is reliable, cost efficient, and scalable, and then maybe use that together with some of the new technologies or platforms that are available.
You mentioned fusion, which is sort of a good example of a new technology, which I'm thinking might come up against a few sort of regulatory hurdles in the future. Is that sort of a limitation of these sorts of ideas, do you think, or is it something that you found that sort of governments, open to adapting? And
well, of course, governments are there to sort of protect citizens,
Yes.
so they will, of course, take that cautious view. On the flip side, you have governments like Singapore, Tana mentioned that, you need a sandbox, and they actually create a regulatory sandbox where they reduce, let's say, rules or regulations for certain new technologies. So I think a lot of people don't know that the first autonomous vehicle that, went on public roads was actually in Singapore, It's because they changed the rules and regulations to allow that. You could probably only purchase lab-based meat and eat it in Singapore because other countries didn't have the regulations in place. So if governments create these sandboxes or are more flexible in terms of rules and regulations, I think that would also really push forward innovation moving forward.
Yeah, I remember that example of Singapore. I was living in Singapore when that happened, and there was sort of a cabinet level discussion in Singapore, and they decided, well, actually, the future is autonomous vehicles, and so we need a safe place to be able to do this. And so they agreed, and then they made it happen, and that was sort of the agility of
Yes.
it. It's pretty inspiring, actually, being able to do that. I saw you nodding a few times around sandboxes there.
Yeah.
Is it your experience of sandboxes across the region? Do we have the right ones in place? Is it a safe space? Do we have enough safe spaces? Do we have a sandbox in Australia? I don't.
Yeah, in the middle of the desert, and I'm sure you have a couple sandboxes. The autonomous vehicle sandbox was Citron. It came out of NTU. It was in partnership with NTU and the LTA. And I know this because I worked with a group that was part of this.
Okay.
Sandbox. One of the really neat things about that particular one, which was, just to carry on from the topic, that was a golf course. I mean, almost like a go-kart course. And it had all the street signs that you would find on a typical Singaporean street. And what it was able to do was actually train the computers, train the software to recognize those signs. That was level one of what was, multiple levels of a video game to launch the autonomous vehicle onto the street. So you started there.
Okay.
Once you were successful there, you then went to the university campus. Once you were successful there, you then went on to the next location, which was in North Sydney, or Singapore. And so what was really neat about that example, and I believe that's certainly one of the gold standards, is to create or generate really unique test beds or sandboxes, you need to have multiple layers of complexity to introduce those layers of complexity into certain types of technologies, especially when it involves human capital as an engagement. But the short answer to your question, do we have enough of those? No, we don't. In fact, that's one of the best ways that I've found corporates are able to contribute to adoption of innovation, certainly from an industry-wide perspective, is being able to section off a part of their business that is a sandbox. It allows companies to demonstrate the technical functionality or feasibility of their technologies inside an operational environment, and it allows the corporate to actually benchmark multiple technologies and make a more informed procurement decision.
Yep.
So it's a win-win on both sides. The startup gets to put it in place with the corporate and put it on their pitch deck. Hey, I'm working
Yep.
with this corporate. The corporate gets to benchmark that solution against others and then identify which is the best one to solve their particular problem.
This sort of model reminds me a little bit of sort of fintech with big banks and stuff, where there was this sort of opportunity for startups to come in to sort of test out their products within the architecture of the big bank to see what sort of works. Is that was the sort of model we're following, or
Certainly,
to some
certainly.
extent?
I think so. I think at least Singapore is very good at it. There are other parts that could improve on it. I certainly tried to do that when I was in the Northern Territory working with the city of Darwin to go get access to.
A proper sandbox up there?
Sorry?
A proper sandbox.
Yeah, proper sandbox. Yeah, there's plenty of sand up there. No, but look, I think the gold standard for test bedding and sandboxes has always been Singapore. I think that is a location that recognizes that they may not necessarily have the market, but they definitely have the capability to think agile and offer locations to test these technologies and lead the region in many cases on the adoption of those technologies. And so we've actually borrowed a lot of those solutions and translated them for our partnerships and engagements, both with universities and with local governments in Australia as well, taken from the experience that we learned overseas.
Maybe if I can add on, because not to be defensive or anything from Team Indonesia here, but you know, I mean, yes, Singapore is great, but it's also a very small state.
That's
and
the
so
point.
for us, you know, when we've worked with the Singaporean government, a lot of Singaporean startups, and the ecosystem they built, yes, is very mature, it's very, you know, complex, it's incomprehensive and what have you, but Singapore doesn't have the same challenges that we have.
Correct.
You know, and so for example, you know, one of the ones that we have in-house right now is using our platform and data to be able to find the most optimal routing to reduce emissions for the millions of orders that are coming through our platform every day, whether it's logistics, transport, e-commerce, what have you, and actually working with some of our 3PL partners, our third-party logistics partners as well, and integrating them into our platform so that they're also able to then optimize their routing and what have you, and actually calculate the emissions that they are, you know, that they are emitting basically from every kind of transport or ride, and then working from it from that angle. But
Yes, it is absolutely not a homogeneous region. This
Yes.
one, Singapore is very different to Thailand, to Indonesia, to every, so really good points. KK, from your perspective, you've talked about one really interesting example of what you've been focusing on in terms of these containerized data centers. Maybe interested in knowing that did you test these with sort of corporates and the end supply and sort of users before developing it? Is that sort of how the business case and the need was sort of developed for that one? And what else might you have on the sort of the technology pathway that you have at Delta?
The interesting part of, the easy answer for us is that, in short, our own facilities is a test bed.
Yeah.
Right. So the green building that I just mentioned, as far as possible, of course we use third-party solutions also, but as far as possible, we even have a standard slides that talk about to ensure technology excellence before installing in customer site. We always test our solution within our own facilities, right? So because the solutions are so varied, we have 7 solutions and over 300 types of products, and I'm just talking about types, regardless of the models. So it's every different product and technology has its own different R&D and product development path. So for example, for our power supply, we have got very stringent EVT, DVT stage, which is firstly the technology required by the customers, and then we work with customers to develop it. Then we have a pilot run, then we have a ORT test and all these things. These are for solid product. But on solution levels, it involves customized use with the customers. It involves software, it involves hardware, it involves after-sales services. So it is, I would say, standard solutions like this are very flexible depending on what the customer's requirement is. If, for example, back to containerized solutions, containerized data center is a very well-established technology as far as Delta is concerned, and we have installed in many cases. So when customers come in, we have a standard proven technology and offerings. So they can let us know that, you want what kind of function, what kind of capacity, what's the cooling power that you require, where are you going to install this, what is the estimated worst case temperature and things like that. We will work that out with them, and of course there will be a period of testing. Whether it's on their side or on our side, it is dependent to customers. Yeah, and different country has their own different regulations. Yeah.
Understood. Interesting. Thank you very much. Just seeing our clock, we've got about just over 5 minutes left, and some opportunity for some questions from the audience if we have any. We do have some microphones at the back of the room. Do stick your hand up and ask us some questions. I'd be surprised if we don't have any. Every session I've had during these last couple of days, we've had a question, and thank you for not letting me down. Perfect, excellent. Just there in the front, third row, just if you stick your hand up. If you could just let us know who you are, where you're from, and your question, please.
Yeah, hi Charles, I'm Zeta from Malaysia and startup owner as well. I just want to know the tips that you can give to what I'm facing right now. We come up with a new technology, a cutting-edge, disruptive technology, but it's very, very hard for us to penetrate the market. The skepticism is there, and the new brand and whatnot, you can even imagine. So I believe you have faced the kind of challenging, so can you share with us?
So tips on taking new technologies to market, overcoming some skepticism about some of these things. Any market sort of insights on this one? Have any of you faced skepticism?
Well, our portfolio always does.
Yes.
If it's okay. Yeah, look, I think that's the power of pilots in many cases. Pilots is a place that's typically, and we just touched on it with the test beds, but it's oftentimes the opportunity where the cost of adopting your technology is subsidized or reduced by, say, a local government that puts some capital in, or a university puts some capital in to support the demonstration of your technology. And so through that test bed or through that pilot, if you're able to demonstrate that your solution works better than the others, that's oftentimes when the larger customers will come around, pay attention, and you'll have real results to put in front of them. That's if it's a hardware company in particular, or to your point, advanced technology, advanced materials. If it's a software company, it oftentimes just requires quite a bit of hustle. And this comes back to different countries, it comes down to quite a bit of hustle and getting as many early adopters on your platform as possible. And you have to think about growth hacking capabilities. You have to think about ways to stretch your dollar as much as possible. Because the minute you start onboarding users or revenue, the clock starts. And from a VC's point of view, we then start to measure your progress over time. Not just progress as a total number, but progress over time. Because we're looking at a very short period of time to go from 0 to billion-dollar business.
Excellent. KK, from your perspective, do you ever encounter skepticism from a sort of a corporate perspective? So you've got your containerized data center, skepticism from the market about, what's the fit for this? How is it going to work? Is it going to be reliable? Is it is there a sell there, or are people just sort of open to sort of the new ways of working?
It's to do with, I would say, brand building, marketing. Yeah. This is very important to reduce skepticism from consumers. That's a primary function of marketing communications, right? Sure. That's the first thing, but it would be unfair for me to share the experience of us going through that because we have the capital to do so, right? But for her case, it's a startup. So maybe first thing, go to Singapore. That's where unicorn happens. Yeah. So the second case, the second thing is that I remember seeing a documentary on Channel News Asia about this guy trying to introduce lab-grown meat, like years ago. That is a no-no. Nobody would ever want to touch those stuff. Yeah, but he did that. He go around pitching for investors. Yeah, the next thing would be get your angel investors, right? You have that money to lose in marketing communication. Yeah, you get that funds. You need that funds. You need the money to push that through. Because you cannot do a personal selling one-to-one until the skepticism is gone. you can't do that. I'm sorry to say
Okay.
that. I mean, from the Marcom perspective, it would be that.
Maybe just 10 seconds.
Yes.
If you come to me and you say, I'm going to solve one of your sustainability problems for you, I can say, great, you know what? I can get some of the budget internally, and we can pilot something, and then there you have it. You can demonstrate to potential investors.
Exactly, yeah.
This is how it works. So I think those partnership things and finding the right corporate partners who are willing to pilot and sandbox with you, amazing strategy.
And even better, you don't have to go to Singapore to do
No,
that.
yeah.
No, which is excellent.
And we're cousins, you know. You can come to Malaysia.
Perfect. Another question? Yes, we've got another one here in the front row. If we could get the microphone through. There's one coming behind you. Thank you very much, sir.
This address to Ms. Tana. My name is Johnny from Delta Electronics. Now, GoTo is a big company in Indonesia. You have a huge logistics. Any plans of transition to net zero from your company? Yeah.
So we have a net zero, I mean, we have a 2030 target, and largely that's around, because 85% of our inventory is from the mobility happening on our platform. And so we've already started transitioning all kind of the fleet to electric vehicles. We've been able to reduce our inventory so far, for example, from 2023 to 24 by 11%. Just by doing things like routing efficiencies on our platform. I mean, before this was an Excel spreadsheet. People were manually doing a lot of these things, which is crazy because we're a tech company with so much data. But just using technology, I guess, in a more clever way to be able to find ways to cut emissions. And so we're very proud of that, and we continue to be on that trajectory. But yeah, energy efficiency, renewable energy adoption, we're 100% renewable energy powered now, not through REX, but through actual purchasing of renewable energy from the state-owned grid. So those kinds of things for us have been kind of where we've been targeting for our net zero targets.
By the way, Johnny is our
I was going to say, is it
country manager in Indonesia. So if you need
oh, okay,
microgrid
great.
solutions,
So
please
please,
look for him.
yeah. Business matchmaking.
Excellent. This is networking
Yes.
in real life, live here.
Yes.
I hope you've been doing some of this outside over coffee as well. You will get a chance to do that again shortly. You're getting a little bit closer to it because this session, unfortunately, we have run out of time for this panel. Good discussion. I'm always filled with optimism after these sorts of discussions because we see the sort of the startup, the smaller agile innovation, the community coming together there, and it sounds like we're pretty well supported for the region. More focus on the region rather than sort of everything just sort of draining out to the US as well, which I think is a positive sign. And also lots of sort of great innovation and ideas coming out of the bigger organizations, the legacy, dare I say it, sort of organizations as well, which is adapting, which is fantastic to see as well. It's a conversation which is active and dynamic, and we could have this again in 6 months' time, and we'll be talking about other things, maybe more fusion energy coming down then as well. We should do a panel on that next time. Thank you very much for each of you, to Charlie, to Tana, to Hiro, and to KK. Thank you very much for your contributions. Please join me in thanking my panel. Thank you very much.